Cops slapped a black woman in court. Seconds later, she took the judge's seat. Thunder cracked outside Seattle's King County Superior Court, though it was mid-morning on a sunny day. In that vaulted chamber, a hush fell over the rows of onlookers. Ebony Summers, her wrists bound by zip ties, stood facing two officers who had just slapped her hard enough that the echo stung every corner of the room. Dust caught in a slant of sunlight, floating between Ebony and the men in uniform, now staring her down with brazen indignation. Panic fluttered in her chest, but she steadied herself. Voices rose, seats creaked, cameras flashed. Then she locked eyes with the judge at the bench and did something that left them all speechless. The morning had begun like any other. Cloud-gray skies above Seattle's downtown, the steady hum of traffic, and people in suits weaving between coffee shops and skyscrapers. Ebony Summers arrived at King County Superior Court promptly at 8:30. She wore a neatly tailored navy suit and carried a slim leather briefcase. A coffee cup warmed her left hand, a small indulgence from the cafe across the street. She'd been here countless times before, but today felt different. Tension hovered in the corridors. Even seasoned attorneys wore pinched expressions, casting concerned glances toward Ebony as she passed. It was the arraignment of her close friend, Ronnie Davenport, that brought Ebony here. Ronnie had been accused of disorderly conduct, though Ebony knew the charges had the rancid smell of a trumped-up excuse to keep him quiet. He was on the verge of exposing financial irregularities in a local penitentiary program, which was rumored to profit from the incarceration of young black men. Ebony had spent weeks building Ronnie's defense, determined to show how the system had targeted him for speaking out. She walked down the corridor lined with framed portraits of past judges, primarily white men in crisp black robes, and reached the smaller, historically significant courtroom 4B. The chatter outside the door was hushed. As Ebony approached, she noticed two uniformed officers posted at the entrance. One was Officer Mink, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, pale complexion, and an air of perpetual impatience. The other was Officer Delgado, younger, with a frequently clenched jaw. "Ma'am, hold up." Officer Mink stepped in front of the door. Ebony lifted her briefcase slightly. "I'm lead counsel for the defendant, Ronnie Davenport," she stated calmly. "The hearing starts in 10 minutes. Officer Mink hesitated. "You sure about that, ma'am? Let's see some ID." She pulled out her wallet and displayed her State Bar membership card with her photo, name, and identification number. She tried to hide her annoyance at being forced to prove her credentials. Mink studied the card for an uncomfortably long time. Delgado's eyes flickered between Ebony's face and the photograph. "You can go in," Mink said at last, stepping aside. "But we'll be watching." The subtext was unspoken but clear. Ebony was under suspicion. She exhaled and entered courtroom 4B. The first thing she saw was Ronnie, seated at the defense table in orange, his wrists shackled. His gaze found Ebony's, and he managed a small, relieved nod. Ebony set her briefcase on the table, greeting Ronnie with a hand on his shoulder. "I've got this," she whispered into his ear. "We're going to prove you were singled out." Before she could open the briefcase, another presence loomed at her side. Officer Delgado leaned over her shoulder. "Step aside, Miss Summers. We need to check your briefcase." Ebony's brow furrowed. "Check my briefcase." "For what?" "A routine security search." "But your colleague outside just saw my ID and let me pass. I've been here many times." Delgado responded with an unwavering stare. "It's policy." She caught the sideways glances of fellow attorneys who were simply walking in with their bags unsearched. The burn in her gut grew. But Ebony handed over the briefcase, determined not to give the officers any reason to delay the proceedings. Delgado rifled through the neatly organized documents, scanning each page with methodical slowness. When the search finally ended, Ebony regained her seat and steadied her composure. The prosecutor, A wiry man named Thomas Bradley in a pinstripe suit strode in, gave Ebony a dismissive nod, and took his place at the other table. Judge Harold Thompson, a tall figure with dark gray hair and a frown etched into his features, entered last, taking his seat at the bench. His voice boomed. "Court is now in session. We will hear the case of State of Washington versus Ronald Davenport." After preliminary remarks, Ebony rose to speak on behalf of Ronnie. She began detailing his impeccable record of community work and the suspicious timing of the charges. Bradley objected within the first 5 minutes, claiming Ebony was grandstanding. The judge sustained the objection, effectively gagging Ebony's line of argument. A wave of frustration coursed through her. She took a calming breath, remembering her mother's words. "Stay composed, Ebony. In justice, composure is strength." So she moved on to her next point, highlighting the biases that led to Ronnie's arrest in the first place. The judge scowled, leaning forward. "Ms. Summers, I suggest you watch your tone. Focus on the matter at hand." Ebony nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, even though her pulse hammered. Midway through her statement, she was interrupted again, this time by Officer Delgado, who approached the defense table without being called upon. "Ms. Summers," he barked, "I suggest you keep your voice down. We won't stand for disruptions in this court." Her jaw tightened. Ronnie fidgeted beside her, unable to hide his anger. The tension swelled, and Ebony felt the weight of every eye upon her. She managed to keep going until the judge abruptly called a recess for personal reasons, leaving Ebony, Ronnie, and the 2 officers in the near-empty courtroom. The moment the judge stepped through his chamber door, Ebony heard a sharp command. "Stand!" Officer Mink demanded. Confused, Ebony rose to face him. "Hands behind your back," he said, grabbing her wrist. She yanked her arm free. "On what grounds?" Ebony demanded. Before she realized it, Delgado's open palm struck her cheek, sending a painful shock through her face. The sound reverberated around the silent courtroom. The sting and the indignation pooled hot behind her eyes. Ronnie gasped. A trembling hush quivered through the onlookers who remained. Ebony pressed a hand to her burning cheek, tears welling at the corners of her eyes. Anger mingled with humiliation. "Disrupting court proceedings and resisting an officer," Delgado stated with forced calm, though his voice had an edge. "We're taking you in for contempt." That was the moment Ebony's gaze snapped to the judge's bench. The humiliation fueling her every breath, Ebony marched forward. She could feel the tension in her own body like an electric current, pushing her onward. Standing in front of the vacant, high-backed chair, she turned slowly. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Even as Ebony resisted the officer's grip, memories flooded back. Her upbringing in Seattle's Central District, a historically black community that thrummed with resilience and adversity. She recalled her father, a civil rights attorney who had stood in these very halls decades earlier, demanding equality. Her mother, a public school teacher, once organized demonstrations to improve funding for under-resourced schools. Ebony had grown up learning that injustice wore many faces and thrived in subtle spaces. It was no accident that she had chosen law as her weapon of choice. From the time she was 8, Ebony would accompany her father, Elijah Summers, to the King County Courthouse, trailing behind him in her little plaid skirt and Sunday shoes. He was known for championing clients who couldn't afford legal representation. She'd watch him deliver impassioned arguments before judges who would sometimes roll their eyes or shut him down. Elijah never bowed to intimidation. The weight of injustice must be lifted piece by piece, he told her. In high school, Ebony joined the debate team and read every legal treatise she could find. It was the 1999 World Trade Organization protests in Seattle that shaped her most profoundly. She witnessed the police response, saw tear gas smother entire blocks, heard the crack of batons against protesters. Many of her friends were arrested simply for being near the demonstrations. That formative experience cemented her commitment to the law and to justice for those without the privilege to demand it. With scholarships and an unstoppable drive, Ebony made it through the University of Washington, then Harvard Law. Upon returning to Seattle to practice, she felt like she'd come full circle. She walked these courthouse halls with confidence, believing that with thorough research, calm persuasion, and an unassailable sense of purpose, she could help shift the scales of justice. But on mornings like this, as she faced officers who saw her as undeserving of the respect due to a lawyer, Ebony felt the sting of systemic bias ratcheted up to full volume. Now, pinned between Delgado's rough grip and Mink's glaring stance, Ebony suddenly recalled a snippet of conversation she'd overheard days earlier. It was about Judge Thompson exploring early retirement. Whispers circulated that a new appointment was imminent. Ebony's ambitions had always been to one day sit on the bench, but she never imagined it would happen so soon. And certainly never like this. Little did Mink and Delgado know, Ebony Summers had already been shortlisted, quietly recommended by a broad coalition of local leaders, including a prominent state Supreme Court justice, for an interim judgeship. The official announcement was expected any day, but Ebony had told almost no one. She wanted to see if it would become real. But Ebony was not in control now, or so it seemed. Her cheeks burned with shame. Officer Delgado's strike to her face still reverberated across her skin, a physical manifestation of every door she'd had to push open in her life. She stood in front of the judge's bench, panting softly, feeling the stares of a dozen spectators. Ronnie was still shackled and dumbfounded behind her, powerless to intervene. She heard a stir of movement as Mink tried to grab her shoulders from behind. A few journalists in the gallery leaped to their feet, cameras popping. Ebony twisted away, but Mink's grip found her wrist. With a deft pivot, Ebony peeled his hand off. "Don't touch me," she almost growled, each word measured. Time seemed to stretch, the tension crackling like static in the air. Then, with nothing but the authority she carried in her voice, Ebony turned to the clerk, a woman named Yvonne who was still behind her desk. "Ms. Whitfield," Ebony said, addressing the clerk formally. "You have a direct line to the presiding judge's chamber, correct?" Yvonne's eyes flicked over Ebony's face and the confused officers. "Yes, Ms. Summers," she managed, her trembling voice betraying her nerves. "Good. I request you place a call immediately and inform Presiding Judge Caldwell of the situation in courtroom 4B. This is an unlawful attempt at intimidation and assault by officers Mink and Delgado." Delgado sneered. "What the hell are you—" "Quiet." Ebony's voice cracked like a whip, the resonance of years of training behind it. Half the observers probably expected Delgado to lash out again, but Ebony noticed a sudden hush, an electrifying shift, as though the entire floor of the courthouse realized something extraordinary was happening behind those heavy doors. Yvonne hesitated, looking from Ebony's swelling cheek to Mink's scowl. Then she lifted the telephone receiver and began dialing. Footsteps sounded from behind as Ebony's stance blocked Mink's pursuit. Ebony took a half-breath, never letting her gaze waver from Delgado. In the corner of her vision, she saw Ronnie leaning forward, eyes wide in disbelief. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Yvonne spoke. "This is Yvonne Whitfield in 4B. We have a situation—" "Yes, Ebony Summers. An assault by 2 officers. Yes, she is counsel." Her voice trailed away as the presiding judge's staff clearly demanded more details. Finally, she relayed the core facts, her tone clipped but resolute. Within minutes, though it felt like hours, an older gentleman in a black robe rushed in, staff in tow. This was Judge Edward Caldwell, the presiding judge for King County Superior Court. News traveled fast in the courthouse. Attorneys and bailiffs from neighboring courtrooms trickled in, forming an anxious crowd. Judge Caldwell peered through the swirl of confusion. Ebony with her reddened cheek, Mink and Delgado standing rigid, Ronnie in shackles, and Yvonne behind her desk, phone still clutched in hand. "Officers, stand down," Caldwell commanded, eyes narrowing at Mink and Delgado. They hesitated, exchanging uncertain looks, but eventually stepped back, letting Ebony breathe freely. Caldwell's gaze rested on Ebony. He knew her father had once co-sponsored a forum on policing reforms alongside Elijah Summers. He also knew Ebony had been under serious consideration for a judicial vacancy. He swallowed, then spoke with quiet authority. "Ms. Summers, we will get to the bottom of this. I apologize for—" She cut him off, her voice trembling, not from weakness but from righteous anger. "No apology can undo what just happened here. Officers Mink and Delgado assaulted me in open court. They're also obstructing my duty as counsel for my client. I demand immediate corrective action." A collective hush pressed in. Mink's face was flushed. Delgado, though younger, glared defiantly. If Ebony's words stung, they refused to show any sign of remorse. The bailiffs looked to Caldwell for guidance. Judge Caldwell took a measured breath. "We will take a brief recess, in which time I will see Ms. Summers, the officers, and Mr. Davenport in my chambers. Until then, no one is going anywhere." A final, authoritative glance at Mink and Delgado made them back off a step. The tension that had hung heavily in the air began to dissipate. But Ebony's anger simmered. She realized that she could lose her composure if she thought too long about Delgado's hand striking her face. She locked eyes with Ronnie, silently promising him that none of this would derail his defense. Reassured by the fleeting recognition in his gaze, Ebony drew herself upright, pressing a firm hand to her trembling chest. Outside, police radio chatter and a commotion of footsteps signaled that the stakes were about to rise even further. Within minutes, Ebony found herself in Judge Caldwell's tidy chamber, the walls lined with legal texts from floor to ceiling. A large desk occupied the middle of the room, stacked with manila folders. Caldwell sat behind it, adjusting his reading glasses, trying to maintain an air of calm authority despite the chaotic swirl in his eyes. Ronnie was escorted in first, wearing shackles. Ebony winced at the sight. Her friend was innocent of any real wrongdoing, yet here he was, treated like a danger to society. Behind Ronnie stood Mink and Delgado, stiff and silent. Two additional bailiffs hovered at the door, uncertain if more violence was about to erupt. Ebony stood to one side, arms crossed, face still throbbing from Delgado's slap. She felt a faint swelling on her cheekbone. The metallic taste of indignation was still on her tongue. Her coat was ruffled. A thick strand of her carefully styled hair now hung loose. But she refused to let her appearance overshadow the gravity of this meeting. Caldwell began, "We need an immediate resolution. Officers, what happened in that courtroom must be explained." Mink cleared his throat and shot a quick look at Delgado, who spoke first. "Your Honor, Ms. Summers was raising her voice and causing a disturbance. She refused to comply with a lawful order. We requested she step back, and she became physically confrontational. We had no choice but to restrain her." Ebony felt her pulse spike. She took a moment to breathe, then fixed Delgado with a razor-sharp stare. "You slapped me across the face. Where does that fall under lawful restraint?" Delgado blushed, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his belt. "She was resisting. I made contact in an effort to protect myself and maintain order. Protect yourself." Ebony repeated the words coldly. "A single attorney, unarmed, in a room full of armed officers, and you needed to protect yourself from me? Is that your official statement?" Mink spoke up, voice quavering slightly. "Your Honor, we believed Ms. Summers posed a threat. We made a judgment call." Caldwell removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Officers, I will not condone violence within these walls unless absolutely necessary. Furthermore, Ms. Summers is widely respected in this courthouse. I've never known her to be unnecessarily combative. An awkward silence followed, broken by Ronnie's sardonic laugh. Unnecessarily combative. I'd say Ebony fought with words, not fists. Caldwell looked at Ronnie. Mr. Davenport, please contain yourself. This is serious. Ebony drew a composed breath. Your Honor, this was not an accident, and it's not just an assault on me. It's an assault on the integrity of this court. These officers singled me out because of my identity. She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. They have repeatedly tried to undermine my role as defense counsel. That is, an officer of the court. I demand that both be held in contempt and placed under immediate investigation for excessive force and civil rights violations. Caldwell's lips tightened. For a moment, Ebony sensed the moral quandary in him. These officers were part of the same justice infrastructure he oversaw. A formal investigation would cast an unflattering spotlight on the courthouse. Even so, Ebony saw the flicker of conviction in Caldwell's gaze. He was a seasoned judge who had weathered controversies before. All right, Caldwell said, each syllable carefully measured. Officers, you are hereby ordered to surrender your firearms and leave them in the custody of the bailiffs until this matter is resolved. You will also be temporarily reassigned away from direct courtroom duty. I will personally request an internal affairs unit to investigate the alleged misconduct. Caldwell turned to Ebony. Ms. Summers, I trust you are aware of the bigger picture here, but rest assured, I will expedite a hearing on this matter. I appreciate it. Ebony's stance remained rigid. But I also need something else. My client, Mr. Davenport, has an arraignment that was obstructed, and I intend to see it through. Caldwell nodded. I will preside over the remainder of Mr. Davenport's hearing personally. Let's reconvene in courtroom 1, a more secure setting. He glanced at Ronnie, noting the shackles. With an apologetic nod, Caldwell signaled a bailiff. Remove those chains. Mr. Davenport is not convicted of anything. He's here for an arraignment. Treat him with the respect every citizen deserves. The bailiff stepped forward and unlocked Ronnie's cuffs. Ronnie rubbed his wrists, relief flooding his features. Ebony mustered a small, encouraging smile in his direction. Caldwell continued, We'll meet in 30 minutes. Ms. Summers, can you proceed? Ebony nodded. Yes, Your Honor. A swirl of tension remained, but an odd sense of validation buoyed Ebony's spirits. The two officers, now stripped of immediate power, exited the chambers with tight jaws, accompanied by the bailiffs. Ebony and Ronnie lingered a moment. She placed a hand lightly on Ronnie's shoulder. I'll make sure this fiasco doesn't overshadow your defense. We'll clear your name, Ronnie. He gave a faint chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. You always did have a knack for stirring up the hornet's nest. Only because the nest stung first, Ebony returned with a rueful grin. They both fell silent, the gravity of the situation pulling them back into anxious steadiness. In the corridor, Ebony found herself face to face with reporters holding cameras and microphones. Word traveled fast, indeed. She caught snippets of questions. Ms. Summers, is it true you were assaulted by the officers? Do you plan to press charges? Is this racially motivated? Ebony's pulse pounded. She knew the entire city might soon be abuzz, especially if these news clips went public. She paused briefly to speak. I'll have a statement after Mr. Davenport's hearing. Until then, I trust Judge Caldwell to handle this swiftly. We can't let abuses of authority continue unchecked, especially not in the supposedly sacred halls of the judiciary. With that, Ebony guided Ronnie down the polished hallway, yearning for a quiet moment to collect her thoughts. She didn't know if next steps would lead to success or a bigger storm of controversy. But Ebony did know that this moment could test the very future of her legal career and her dream of shaping the bench with a deeper sense of equity. No matter what came next, there was no turning back now. 30 minutes later, Courtroom 1 buzzed with anticipation. Reporters, curious court staff, and the few bystanders who had heard rumors of the altercation packed the pews. The dais here was higher, and the room was better lit than 4B. Tall windows let in the husky Seattle daylight, illuminating the heavy oak benches. Ronnie took a seat at the defense table, this time without shackles. Ebony stood beside him, impeccably upright despite the residual ache in her cheek. The metallic taste of injustice danced on her tongue, but she stayed outwardly composed. They both watched as Judge Caldwell re-entered, robes fluttering behind him. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. The entire courtroom rustled to its feet. Caldwell nodded, and they sat again. Before we address the arraignment of Mr. Davenport, there is a preliminary matter. The court acknowledges that counsel for the defense, Ms. Ebony Summers, was assaulted in an adjoining courtroom only minutes ago. An internal affairs investigation is pending. However, Ms. Summers has stated her readiness to continue as counsel, Caldwell said, scanning the room. Let's proceed with the case at hand. Thomas Bradley, the prosecutor from the earlier session, looked distinctly awkward, like a man who had realized he'd bet on the wrong horse. Ebony greeted him with a thin smile that carried no warmth. He cleared his throat and read the charges against Ronnie. Disorderly conduct during a public protest, interfering with official police business, and trespassing on municipal property. Ebony carefully recorded the charges in her notes, though she already knew them by heart. Once Bradley finished stating the formalities, Ebony stood. She methodically laid out a reasoned argument for why Ronnie's charges should be dismissed outright. She detailed how Ronnie had been raising awareness about suspicious deals between private prison investors and local politicians, leading to a pipeline that disproportionately affected young black men. She cited the dubious circumstances of his arrest. Officers had not read him his rights, had not given a clear reason for detaining him, and had used excessive force. Caldwell listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Bradley to read his reactions. Bradley tried to interject. "Your Honor, Ms. Summers is conflating activism with the violation of city ordinances. Mr. Davenport was lawfully removed and resisted, and we have no concrete evidence that his protest was singled out for discriminatory reasons." Ebony pressed her fingertips to the edge of the desk, choosing her words carefully. "How, then, did you arrive at a full squad of officers for one peaceful protester? Mr. Davenport was alone, carrying only flyers. It seems a bit of an overreach." Caldwell rubbed his chin. "I'd like to hear from any witnesses or see any evidence of the so-called excessive response." This was Ebony's moment. She flicked through her organized stack of documents and pulled out a flash drive. "We have a video, recorded by a bystander showing Mr. Davenport's arrest. If the court permits, I can present it now." Caldwell nodded. The bailiff took the flash drive, plugged it into a monitor at the front of the courtroom. A grainy video flickered to life. It showed Ronnie standing on a sidewalk near Seattle City Hall. He was holding up a flyer about convict labor profiteering. 3 uniformed officers approached, and as Ronnie attempted to show them the flyer, one officer lunged, tackling him to the pavement. Ronnie's voice could be heard protesting, "I'm not resisting," before the clip ended abruptly. When the video stopped, a hush enveloped the room. Even Bradley pursed his lips, looking as though he'd arrived unprepared for such concrete evidence. Caldwell turned from the screen to Bradley. "Prosecutor, this raises questions about whether the force used was proportional." Bradley fiddled with his pen. "Well, Your Honor, context is everything. We only have a snippet here." Caldwell closed his eyes for a beat, then looked toward Ebony. "Ms. Summers, I'd like to propose a hearing to review all evidence and testimony, but for now we're only addressing the arraignment. Given what I've seen, Mr. Davenport's bail is set at a minimal amount. I see no reason for him to remain in custody." Ebony exhaled, relief cresting in her chest. "Thank you, Your Honor. My client requests to be released on recognizance." Bradley attempted to object, but Caldwell raised a hand. "The bail is set at $1,000. If Mr. Davenport can meet that, he'll be released today." Ebony and Ronnie exchanged hopeful glances. He would be out of jail by evening, free to help Ebony prepare his full defense. Once the formalities concluded, Caldwell rapped his gavel. Court is adjourned until the hearing is scheduled. Ms. Summers, if you need an official statement regarding the earlier assault, my office is available. This court ensures your rights to practice law without intimidation. A stirring of applause broke out somewhere in the back. Perhaps a group of Ebony's supporters, or maybe just outraged citizens who admired her resilience. Ronnie beamed, patting her on the shoulder. "Thank you, Ebony. Guess I picked the right lawyer." She offered a small, genuine smile. "We have more to do, but this is a good start." As they began gathering their belongings, Ebony felt a subtle shift in the air behind her. Cameras clicked. She turned to see a woman in a crisp black suit approach from the corridor's side door. Ebony recognized her. State Supreme Court Justice Mary Quintero. A hush followed Justice Quintero's entrance. Approaching Ebony, the justice extended a handshake. "Ms. Summers," Quintero said softly, with a warm, measured tone. "I witnessed what happened earlier. Unacceptable behavior from those officers. I came to personally convey my support, and to let you know that the final recommendation for a new interim judge at King County Superior Court has been signed." She paused, letting Ebony absorb the significance. "Congratulations." The single word rang in the hush, and Ebony's eyes widened. "Justice Quintero, Quintero placed a gentle hand on Ebony's still stinging cheek. Her voice was kind, yet resolute. "I'm sorry you had to endure that. But soon the seat behind that bench may be yours. Keep standing your ground, Ebony. The system needs you more now than ever." A swirl of conflicting emotions flared across Ebony's features. Shock, pride, and a lingering sense of disbelief. Ronnie's jaw dropped. The reporters listening on the edges of the crowd began firing more camera flashes. Ebony found herself uncertain how to respond. In that instant, the gravity of her journey felt like a whirlwind around her. She saw the battered illusions of fairness that had cracked wide open a mere hour earlier. And now, in the same hallowed halls, she was being handed the power to enact real change. Ebony swallowed, her gaze flicking momentarily to an empty seat behind the bench, the physical representation of authority in the courtroom. Justice Quintero squeezed her shoulder and withdrew, disappearing as quietly as she'd come, leaving Ebony standing among a throng of onlookers, each stunned by the juxtaposition of events. Today, Ebony had been struck down, only to be offered one of the most revered seats in the House. The question rose in her mind. What would she do with the power now that it was within reach? A swirl of reporters and blinking cameras followed Ebony and Ronnie as they left Courtroom 1. The corridors of the King County Courthouse had become a veritable press gauntlet. Journalists formed an impromptu semicircle, pressing toward Ebony with microphones and phones raised high. She paused before the elevator, turning to face their barrage of questions. Among the throng, a local affiliate reporter named Lance Wainwright, whom Ebony recognized from past civil rights coverage, spoke up. "Ms. Summers, can you confirm whether the rumors are true that you've just been appointed as an interim judge?" Ebony's voice felt shaky, but she mustered the same composure she used in the courtroom. "I was informed just moments ago. Yes, I've been recommended for an interim judgeship. I'm deeply honored. But please understand, today's events, the assault by Officers Mink and Delgado, highlight systemic issues. We cannot celebrate progress for one of us while ignoring the injustices that remain." Another reporter thrust forward a notepad. "Will you press charges against those officers?" Ebony exchanged a quick glance with Ronnie, who nodded encouragingly. She turned back to the reporter. "There will be an investigation. I intend to cooperate fully. What they did must have consequences under the law, just like any other assault. We demand accountability." The elevator bell chimed. Ronnie and Ebony stepped inside, the crowd of cameras blocked by the slow-closing doors. As they ascended to the ground floor, Ronnie exhaled loudly, leaning against the elevator wall. "You're unstoppable, Ebony." Shoulders trembling from the outpouring of adrenaline, Ebony let out a nervous laugh. "I feel like I might collapse, honestly." Ronnie's face softened. "You deserve a rest, but I doubt you'll get one anytime soon. News like this? Hawaii would be nice right now." She shook her head, though she couldn't help smiling. "No time for Hawaii. We have a hearing to plan and a system to fix. Besides, we have our community behind us. People are counting on us." They returned to the courthouse lobby. Ebony parted ways with Ronnie, who headed to process the bail paperwork. She lingered near a soaring marble column, gathering her breath. Scrolling through her phone, she saw dozens of missed calls and messages. Friends, colleagues, and ironically, a few from local law enforcement organizations offering to clear up any misunderstandings. Ebony set the phone down for a moment, leaning her head back against the column. Her father was away in Atlanta, visiting relatives, but Ebony wanted more than anything to call him. She could imagine his voice. "Baby, you keep that chin high. The law needs brave hearts." She nearly dialed him when a familiar figure appeared in front of her. Grace Mitchell, a longtime family friend, now a prominent community organizer. Short and stocky, Grace wore a bright yellow cardigan and clutched her purse to her side. "Ebony!" Grace's eyes glistened with pride and worry. "I heard. Are you okay?" "That officer..." Ebony managed a tight nod. "I'm fine, except I feel like I'm in a waking dream." Grace wrapped her in a fierce hug. "I'm proud of you. Your father will be too. And you better prepare, because the entire neighborhood will want to celebrate soon." A tear slipped down Ebony's cheek, partly from exhaustion, partly from gratitude. "I can't believe this is how it happened," she whispered. "It's bittersweet to be battered one moment and offered a judgeship the next." Grace offered a resolute smile. "That's America, Ebony. Nothing is ever simple, but you'll do great things, and I got your back." She patted Ebony's arm gently. "Now go handle your business. I'll be around." Ebony found a quiet bench to sit on, collecting her thoughts. Taking out a notepad, she jotted down the next steps for Ronnie's defense. She reminded herself to prepare a thorough statement for the press about the assault. She also scrawled, "Call Dad," in bold letters, then appointment details. She paused at that last line. The swirl of her own handwriting seemed to speak to the chaos in her mind. She wanted to be excited about the appointment. Hadn't she dreamed of becoming a judge since she was a child? Yet a part of her felt uneasy, like stepping into the system's top rung might strip away her ability to fight from the trenches. Lost in thought, Ebony didn't notice the tall, suited figure approach. When she glanced up, she recognized her mentor and friend, Harlan Gibson, a veteran civil rights lawyer in his 70s. He stepped forward, leaning on a dark wooden cane. "Ebony, my star pupil. Heard you nearly took over the bench by force." He smirked dryly. She gave him a weary grin. "Not by force. By necessity, maybe." "I see you're battered," Harlan said softly, noting her cheek. "But not broken. That's the Ebony I know." She gestured for him to sit. As Harlan settled beside her, she caught the sharp tang of aftershave and faint cologne, a reassuring presence from her law school days. He'd once told her that the law was a double-edged sword. The same system that grants rights can also strip them away, depending on who wields the blade. "You're about to be on the other side of that bench," Harlan said, nodding toward the corridor. "How does it feel?" Ebony mulled the question. "Scary, liberating, uncertain. I want to make changes from within. But the system can be a swamp. I'm worried I'll lose my fire, or get entangled in politics and bureaucracy." Harlan tapped his cane lightly. "Times are changing. The courts need people who understand the collision between justice and lived experience. Don't discount the power you'll have. You can set precedents, and your presence alone might shift the culture. She inhaled slowly, the swirling chaos in her chest settling. "You're right," she said softly, as if convincing herself. "I have a chance to make sure fewer people experience what Ronnie and I have gone through." Harlan nodded, exhaustion in his own eyes. "This is a heavy mantle, Ebony. But you've been groomed for this your whole life. By your family, by the battles you fought. And after what we saw today, your voice isn't going anywhere. Those who want you silent will have to face the fact that you're presiding now." A flicker of determination rekindled behind Ebony's tired gaze. She gripped Harlan's hand, pressing it lightly in gratitude. "I won't let them, or myself down." Standing, Ebony felt renewed resolve. She might have come in as a defense attorney, bruised by uniformed officers, but she would leave as a symbol of something far larger. Whether that seat was cursed or blessed depended on what she did next. And Ebony intended to do a lot more than warm that bench. Over the next week, Ebony navigated a maelstrom of paperwork, phone calls, and press statements. The official announcement from the governor's office came swiftly. Ebony Summers was named interim judge of the King County Superior Court, filling a vacancy left by a retiring judge. Letters of congratulations arrived from across the country, some from old classmates at Harvard, others from activists Ebony had once organized with. She barely slept, fueled by nervous energy and the swirl of new responsibilities. Meanwhile, the internal affairs investigation into officers Mink and Delgado was gathering momentum. Dozens of witnesses had come forward, including journalists who documented Ebony's violent encounter. The court clerks had also stepped up, bravely recounting how the officers targeted Ebony. Under mounting evidence, Mink and Delgado were placed on administrative leave, their fates pending a formal review. Local newspapers printed headlines like, "Seattle court appointee assaulted by cops, a symptom of deeper issues." Social media exploded with opinions running the gamut from, "Finally, real change," to the dark corners spewing hate and racism. Striding through the courthouse halls felt surreal for Ebony now. She was escorted by bailiffs who bowed their heads politely and addressed her as Judge Summers. She hadn't even donned the black robe yet. Her official swearing in would happen in just a few days. But the shift in how people treated her was palpable. Some staff who once barely noticed her presence now hurried to open doors. Others flashed nervous smiles, unsure if Ebony might remember any dismissive slight from the past. In her new office, small but bright, Ebony sat behind a polished wooden desk, scanning the docket. The final step before stepping onto the bench was to shadow Judge Caldwell in a few sessions. She had kept a close eye on Ronnie's case, of course, ensuring that the hearing schedule was fair and transparent. Word was that Bradley, the prosecutor, planned to drop several of the more dubious charges against Ronnie in the hopes of saving face. A knock on the partially open door startled her. She looked up and saw Judge Caldwell himself, wearing a reserved smile. "Mind if I pop in for a minute?" He held a steaming cup of coffee. Ebony gestured to an armchair by the desk. "Not at all, Your Honor." Caldwell carefully set the coffee on a side table and lowered himself into the seat. He studied Ebony's face, still faintly bruised but healing, and let out a soft sigh. "How are you holding up?" Ebony leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Honestly, it's overwhelming. One moment I'm a defense attorney in a physical altercation with court officers, the next I'm preparing to wear the robe. I feel unsettled." Caldwell nodded sympathetically. "That's understandable. Transitions like this are tumultuous, especially under these circumstances. You have to embrace the authority you've earned. Remember, you're not an imposter. You've worked for this." Ebony managed a grateful smile. "Thank you for believing in me. I just want to do the job well, without losing the sense of purpose that brought me to law." Caldwell smiled. "I recall you from years ago, trailing your father around as a teenager. You were always soaking up everything. You're exactly the kind of judge we need. Someone who sees the human side of these files. Don't forget that." With those words, Caldwell stood, retrieving his coffee. "Oh, and Ms. Summers. Sorry, Judge Summers." He corrected himself with a playful grin. "If you need anything, my door's open." After Caldwell left, Ebony fixed her gaze on the black robe draped across a garment rack near her desk. She rose slowly and approached it. Running her fingers along the fabric, she felt an unexpected wave of emotion. This robe symbolized centuries of tradition that had historically excluded people who looked like her. She thought of her father, of her mother, of the activism that shaped her youth. She could hear chanting crowds from old protests echoing in her mind. No justice, no peace. She slipped the robe on over her crisp blouse. It felt heavy despite its light fabric. She turned to face the small mirror on the closet door, seeing herself as others might see her. Ebony Summers, a black woman stepping onto one of the highest perches within the local justice system. A flash of determination blazed in her reflection. Society might strain to accept her in that seat, and many would be watching, waiting for her to fail. But Ebony would not give them that satisfaction. A beep from her phone drew her attention. A text from Ronnie read, "They're opening an official hearing for Mink and Delgado. The city is taking it seriously. I told you the tide would turn." Ebony's lips curled into a slow, determined smile. "The tide, indeed." She typed back, "This is just the start. Let's make it count." Then, gently removing the robe, she hung it back on the rack. There was a formal ceremony in 2 days, but Ebony planned to wear it in the judge's chamber for the first time the following Monday, her official day on the bench. And on that day, the attorneys and the public, including those 2 offending officers if they dared attend, would see Ebony Summers presiding with dignity they could not silence. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable sunshine, its rays blasting through the glass facade of the courthouse. King County Superior Court soared against Seattle's skyline, a fortress of polished stone and civility. But Ebony knew that within these walls, a tidal shift was about to occur. Her swearing-in ceremony 2 days earlier had been relatively brief, a formal vow administered by Judge Caldwell in a private chamber, witnessed by a small circle of family and friends, including Ronnie. But today was her first official day presiding. Nervous energy danced in her bloodstream as she walked into courtroom 2, black robe draped over her arm, to take her seat at the bench for the very first time. Courtroom 2 had been reserved strategically, able to hold a sizable audience. The overhead lights hummed. Her father had managed to fly in from Atlanta late last night, and Ebony glimpsed him in the second row, wearing a proud grin. She also noticed Harlan Gibson, Grace Mitchell, and even some old faces from her neighborhood sprinkled among the attorneys. Suspense hung thick in the air as Ebony stepped onto the raised platform. A hush fell like a velvet curtain when she turned to face the room. A bailiff, an older black woman named Janice Moore, stepped forward and beckoned Ebony. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Ebony Summers," she announced in a firm, clear voice. The entire courtroom stood in unison, and Ebony's heart hammered like never before. She slipped the robe on, carefully adjusting it over her shoulders. In that moment, she could almost feel generations of her ancestors standing behind her. She sat, and the crowd followed suit. Ebony inhaled, trying to speak without the quiver of nerves. "Good morning. We have a full docket, so let's commence." Her voice echoed through the microphone, steady and clear. The first several cases were minor matters: bail hearings, motion scheduling, procedural housekeeping. Ebony listened intently, applying her knowledge but also her empathy. A few more boisterous attorneys tried to test her patience with rambling arguments, only to find Ebony firm but courteous in her rulings. Her father, sitting in the gallery, gave her a discreet thumbs up at one point. After the morning recess, Ebony returned to the bench, scanning the list of upcoming hearings. Near the bottom was an entry that quickened her pulse. In the matter of Officers Mink and Delgado, preliminary hearing on assault allegations. Her heart thumped. She had insisted she be allowed to preside over the hearing, recognizing the conflict. But the judiciary's ethics board had reviewed it swiftly. Given Ebony was the victim, they considered reassigning the hearing. Yet Ebony had argued that her testimony would be handled separately by an independent judge if needed. But the preliminary hearing on whether the officers would face contempt remained a procedural matter for the court's standard rotation. Surprisingly, the board agreed. They assigned Ebony to handle the question of whether there was enough cause for a formal contempt proceeding. For Ebony, it was a chance to fulfill a moral imperative. The system didn't get to hide behind departmental illusions. The courtroom rattled with hushed buzzing when the hearing for Mink and Delgado was announced. Cameras from local news networks blinked their red lights. Ebony straightened her posture, pressing her lips into a composed line. We will now hear the preliminary motions in the matter of Officer Randall Mink and Officer Jose Delgado regarding alleged assault on defense counsel and allegations of contempt. Prosecutor Sarah Fuentes is present on behalf of the city, and attorneys for the officers are also present. Let's proceed. A small, wiry attorney with horn-rimmed glasses stepped forward for Mink and Delgado. Your Honor, my clients maintain they were performing their duties. We plan to request full dismissal before this escalates. Ebony's tone was measured. Noted. And from the prosecution? Fuentes, the city's attorney, rose. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence that Officers Mink and Delgado unlawfully struck Ms. Summers, now Judge Summers, and attempted to forcibly remove her without cause. We have testimonies from multiple eyewitnesses, video recordings, and additional factors suggesting bias or abuse of power. We request a formal contempt hearing. A hush blanketed the gallery. Ebony locked eyes with Mink and Delgado. Mink's hairline glistened with sweat, and Delgado's jaw was set like stone. They wore their dress uniforms, though Ebony was aware both had been placed on administrative leave. She recalled the sting of Delgado's palm on her cheek, the humiliating burn in that moment. Her chest tightened, but her voice did not waver. Under normal circumstances, a fact-finding inquiry would be in the hands of any other judge. However, given the conflict of interest, the actual assault charges will be addressed by Judge Caldwell. We are here to determine whether there is probable cause to advance a contempt proceeding. If found, the officers will be summoned to a separate trial. Officers, do you understand? Their attorney quickly answered, Yes, Your Honor. Ebony flicked a glance at the court clerk. We've received statements from the clerk, Ms. Yvonne Whitfield, and from the bailiff on duty that day, Mr. Henry Lansing, confirming that Ms. Summers was physically assaulted. This aligns with video evidence taken by an independent journalist. In addition, the sworn affidavit from Ms. Summers, now the presiding judge, details the events which transpired. The defendant's counsel tapped his foot anxiously. Your Honor, might I remind the court that Ms. Summers, while indeed a judge now, was at the time a lawyer in the heat of an argument? Adrenaline can cause misinterpretations. Ebony felt the corners of her mouth tighten. Be that as it may, physical contact was made. We have multiple corroborations. The question before this court is whether it constitutes contempt and an assault beyond the scope of lawful enforcement practices. She paused, letting the air in the room settle. Circumstantially, the evidence is compelling. I see no reason to halt the process. A separate judge will evaluate the assault charges, but this preliminary hearing concerns contempt within this court. The record is clear the alleged conduct happened here, in open court. Officers Mink and Delgado, she said, turning to them. You are hereby ordered to appear at a formal contempt hearing 2 weeks from now, under the supervision of presiding Judge Caldwell. Failing to appear will incur immediate sanctions. The hush shattered into a flurry of whispers. Motion to Ebony's right. Mink's attorney bristled, scribbling notes. Delgado stared at the floor. Ebony maintained her composure, though inside she felt a swirl of vindication and trembling relief. She added, "Court dismissed on this matter." The gavel knocked once, abrupt and final. The cameras flared, capturing the moment Ebony stood, robe swirling as she turned away. In her mind, she heard the echoes of 1,000 stories. Black men and women assaulted or silenced by those in power, their testimonies swept under the rug. Today, she had pulled back the rug, if only a little. The fight was far from finished, but in the seat of authority, Ebony's voice was no longer easily dismissed. 2 weeks later, the entire city of Seattle buzzed with anticipation over the upcoming contempt hearing for Mink and Delgado. Newspapers and local TV outlets covered Ebony's ascent and the parallel disciplinary case as if it were the biggest story of the year. Some headlines spun sensational narratives, highlighting Ebony's meteoric rise and the racial tensions simmering just beneath the surface. Online chatter soared. Some cheered Ebony as a champion of overdue reform, while others labeled her a radical who'd disrupt traditional policing. Ronnie's hearing was also imminent. With Ebony now stationed on the bench, she couldn't personally defend him. Yet she quietly collaborated with the new defense attorney, providing meticulously organized evidence and behind-the-scenes moral support. The day before Ronnie's trial, Ebony found a moment after hours to meet him in an empty corridor of the courthouse. Ronnie, dressed in a pressed white shirt and neat slacks, paced nervously by the windows that overlooked the city. "The new attorney's good," he assured Ebony. "But I miss your presence." Ebony placed a hand on his shoulder. "Trust me, you'll be fine. We have the evidence, and the city dropped the most serious charges. This should be cut and dried." He cast a worried glance. "They might still try to twist it." Her gaze softened. "Remember, you're a hero in your own right, standing up for what's right. Let the truth ring out." She gave him a reassuring squeeze and left him to gather his thoughts. On the morning of Ronnie's trial, Ebony had to recuse herself from the bench in that department, assigned instead to a different docket. She only caught wind of the verdict through second-hand reports. By midday, though, the news was unequivocal. Ronnie was acquitted of all charges. The judge overseeing his case cited insufficient evidence of wrongdoing and strong proof of unconstitutional overreach by law enforcement. Elated calls and texts flooded Ebony's phone. She took a quiet moment in her chambers to let the relief wash over her. Her friend was free, and the system had, for once, worked in their favor. Nonetheless, Ebony knew the heavy lifting remained. Mink and Delgado's formal contempt hearing commenced the very next day. In the hush of a packed courtroom 3, Ebony sat in the front row, not on the bench. Judge Caldwell presided. A swirl of lawyers, journalists, and concerned citizens filled every seat. Mink and Delgado, each flanked by their own legal counsel, wore tense expressions. The atmosphere was practically electric. Over the course of the proceeding, Caldwell allowed testimony from Ebony, the clerk Yvonne Whitfield, bailiff Lansing, and even some members of the public who had been in 4B on the fateful day. Delgado's counsel attempted to argue partial self-defense, painting Ebony as an aggressive figure. But cross-examination by the city's special prosecutor dismantled those claims, pointing out Ebony's professional record, her measured tone, and the video evidence capturing Delgado raising his hand to slap her. By late afternoon, the room crackled with silent tension. Judge Caldwell rapped his gavel for order. "I have reviewed the evidence in detail, including video footage, sworn affidavits, and statements from impartial witnesses. Officers Mink and Delgado not only abused their authority, but engaged in willful violence in the very courtroom intended to uphold and protect the law. This behavior amounts to contempt of court. I will be issuing sanctions, effective immediately." A hush fell. Caldwell's voice rang out with quiet intensity. The formal disciplinary route in the police department is separate, but for their contempt here, each officer is fined and sentenced to a 30-day confinement in county jail, suspended pending completion of a court-mandated misconduct training and civil rights education program. Should they fail or refuse to comply fully, the sentence will be enforced. A radio reporter in the gallery gasped softly as cameras flashed. Mink's attorney nodded grimly, while Delgado's counsel scribbled furiously. The officers themselves stood in stunned silence. It was unusual, almost unheard of, for judges to jail police officers for contempt. Even if partially suspended, it was still a damning statement. And Ebony could see the shock and anger flaming in Mink and Delgado's eyes. When the hearing concluded, onlookers spilled into the hallway, discussing the significance of the ruling. Ebony lingered by the door, meeting Delgado's gaze one last time. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Ebony offered no words, only a measured, unwavering stare that echoed. The era of unchallenged brutality within these halls is ending. That evening, Ebony hosted a small gathering in her new office. Ronnie was there, fresh off his acquittal, carrying a casserole dish from the local soul food restaurant. Grace Mitchell arrived, offering Ebony a bouquet of white lilies for your new seat. Harlan Gibson hobbled in on his cane, smiling like a proud grandfather, and Ebony's father, Elijah Summers, flew in once again, his eyes brimming with tears as he enveloped his daughter in a long embrace. "I swear, Ebony, your mother would be dancing in the streets," Elijah said, voice tight with emotion. "Look at what you've done." Ebony swallowed back tears, hugging him close. She turned to gaze at the corner of the office, where the black judicial robe hung, waiting for the next session. "I couldn't have done it alone," she whispered. "This was a collective dream, Dad." He nodded. "And you're making it real." They all gathered around Ebony's desk, sipping sweet tea, nibbling on cornbread. Ronnie told jokes, and Grace recounted the day Ebony once debated half the city council as a teenager. The tension of the past few weeks began to evaporate in the warmth of camaraderie. Late that night, when the others had gone, Ebony sat alone at the desk, the city's lights winking beyond the window. She thought of Mink and Delgado, how their case might still lead to deeper departmental reforms. She pictured Ronnie, free of the shadow of false charges, planning his next campaign for justice in the privatized prison industry. And she reflected on how a single moment, being slapped in that courtroom, had ignited a chain of events culminating in real, tangible change. Fatigue weighed on her limbs, but Ebony's spirit glowed with cautious optimism. She was determined to keep forging ahead, to ensure the robes she now wore became synonymous not with elitism, but with empathy, fairness, and the fierce pursuit of justice. As the clock moved toward midnight, Ebony finally rose. There was no telling what battles lay on tomorrow's docket, but she was ready to meet them, head high, unflinching, the echo of her mother's words reverberating through her mind. Justice is not a dream if you have the courage to claim it. In the aftermath of that tumultuous day, Officers Mink and Delgado faced legal and professional consequences, forced to reconcile with the very system they'd once presumed to control. Ronnie Davenport walked free, his name cleared, spurring a broader conversation about the prison pipeline in Seattle. And Ebony Summers settled into her new role as interim judge, determined to bring the same composure and moral conviction to the bench that she'd once brought to the defense table. The ripples of her actions carried far beyond King County, sparking conversations about policing, racial bias, and institutional accountability across the nation. Thank you for watching this powerful story on YouTube. If you found meaning in Ebony's fight and believe in standing up against injustice, subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and share it with those who need hope. Your voice can be the start of a new ripple of change. Keep watching and keep fighting for what's right.